The night the cops reached for my wrists, Cameron Hale stepped between us like a man possessed. Soaked suit, clenched jaw, eyes wild, and he shouted, "Touch her, and you answer to me," and I swear the whole lobby went silent like the building itself held its breath. Red and blue lights were strobing across marble walls, rain was slapping the glass doors, and somewhere upstairs, an ambulance crew was fighting to keep his twin boys alive. Yeah, that happened. And the crazy part is, I'd been fired less than an hour earlier for doing something unforgivable in that penthouse. I made two little boys laugh, I let them move, I treated them like they were alive. My name's Rosa. I clean houses for a living. I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor, I'm not rich. And in Cameron's world, that meant I was background noise. The kind of person people talk over without even noticing they're doing it. You know what I mean? So when I tell you I ended up holding the one piece of evidence that saved those kids, you'll understand why I still wake up angry sometimes. Not just at the villains, but at how easy it was for everyone to believe I was the problem. Before we get into it, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is, and tell me right now, honestly, if you walked into a luxury building and saw a woman in yellow cleaning gloves being accused by a nurse in crisp white scrubs, who would you assume was telling the truth? Because that question is basically the whole story. Cameron's place was in Chicago's Gold Coast, one of those towers with a private elevator that opens straight into the apartment. No hallway, no neighbors, just quiet and money, and that sterile lemon disinfectant smell, like someone tried to scrub grief out of the air. The first time I walked in, I thought, this isn't a home. This is a museum that learned how to breathe. Everything was beautiful, and everything felt cold. The stone floors, the glass walls, the expensive furniture nobody sat on. And in the middle of all that was a therapy room that looked like a small clinic, padded mats, parallel bars, medical fridge with a lock, a shelf of devices that beeped and glowed like they were in charge. That room belonged to Miles and Noah, the twins, 3 years old, pale little faces, soft hair, those big eyes that have seen too much adult panic, and they spent most of their day strapped into high-tech chairs, like the chairs were their bodies. Cameron told me on day one, voice tight like he was reading something he didn't want to believe. They have a progressive neuromuscular condition, and he listed specialists like a man listing prayers, Johns Hopkins, Mayo, private clinics in Switzerland. It was like if he named enough famous places, then fate would get embarrassed and back off. He paid for everything 80 grand a month, sometimes more, and still he looked like a man who hadn't slept in years. Then there was Trish Weller, the nurse, 50-something, hair pulled back so tight it made her forehead look sharp posture, like she'd been raised by rules, and she ran that penthouse like it was her ward. Trish didn't yell, she didn't have to. She'd walk in and the air would rearrange itself around her. The first time she spoke to me, she handed me a laminated list of instructions, not even kidding, laminated. And she said, household staff does not interact with patients. You clean, you disinfect, you leave. And the way she said patients, not kids, made my stomach twist. Cameron stood behind her nodding, and I could tell he hated the situation. But he trusted Trish the way scared people trust authority, like her confidence was oxygen. My job was simple on paper, mop wipe polish, keep things shining. And I did that. I'm good at what I do, but you can't be in a place like that and not notice the real dirt, the kind you can't bleach. Miles and Noah barely spoke when Trish was around. They stared at the ceiling. They went quiet when she approached. And they slept a lot, like those deep, heavy naps that don't look restful, more like their bodies were powering down. When Cameron was home, Trish was all professional compassion, checking vitals, adjusting straps, talking about dosage, windows, and heart rate. And Cameron would hover hands half raised, like he was afraid his touch might break them. When Cameron left for work, Trish became lazy, not messy, lazy. Controlled, lazy. She'd park the boys in front of some cartoon, put her feet up like she owned the place, and disappear into her phone for long stretches, while those kids just sat there, eyes dull like little ghosts. I'm not saying she never did anything, she did plenty when she wanted an audience, but I saw the difference, and once you see that, it sticks in your throat. The thing is, I didn't come in there trying to be a hero. I wasn't plotting some big showdown. I was just cleaning windows one afternoon, the kind of floor-to-ceiling glass that shows the lake like it's a painting, and I felt those little eyes on me. Kids get bored, right? Adults forget that boredom can feel like pain when you're trapped. So I started making the work playful without even thinking. I exaggerated my motions. I wiped the glass in big, slow circles like I was conducting an orchestra. I did a tiny spin to reach the top corner, and I pulled a face like, wow, this window is really putting up a fight. Miles's mouth twitched. Noah's eyes widened, and I thought, okay, there they are. There's my boys. I was wearing these ridiculous neon yellow gloves, the thick rubber kind you buy at a grocery store, and I held my hands out, palms up, not grabbing, not lifting, just offering them something steady. Miles reached first, fingers shaking, and when he gripped my glove, he pushed up like his legs were waking up from a long sleep. I saw muscle engage. I saw effort, real effort, and it hit me like electricity because I'd been told these kids basically couldn't move without breaking. He stood swaying, breathing fast, and I kept my hands there like a rail, close enough to catch him, not close enough to steal the moment. Noah watched him like he was watching a miracle. Then he reached for my other glove and did the same thing, trembling, giggling, terrified, and thrilled all at once. They were upright, both of them, and then they started playing. Noah grabbed a toy doctor kit and shoved a plastic stethoscope against my chest, shouting, Miles took 2 careful steps toward me, 2 steps, not dragged, not carried, just walking with my hands as support. And I swear you could feel the room come alive. And right then the private elevator opened and Cameron walked in. I'll never forget the sound. His expensive briefcase hit the marble with this dull thud, and Cameron didn't even flinch. He just stared, mouth slightly open like his brain couldn't file what his eyes were seeing. For half a heartbeat his face softened, like hope tried to enter, and then fear slammed the door. "Get away from them," he shouted, and his voice cracked through that room so hard, Miles startled. His knees buckled, and he fell onto the rug. He started screaming, not from pain, from terror, and Noah cried too, reaching for him, like he thought the floor itself was dangerous. Cameron rushed past me and dropped to his knees, hands shaking, as he checked Miles' arms and legs and ribs, whispering, "Does it hurt? Did you break anything?" And I could see the guilt already chewing him up, because he loved them, he really did. He was just drowning in what he'd been told. Then he looked up at me, eyes dark, and he said, "I pay you to clean, not to kill my children," like I was some reckless idiot who'd decided to use sick kids as toys. I felt my face burn, not because I was ashamed, but because it was so unfair it almost made me laugh. "They stood up," I said, pointing at the truth right in front of him. "They walked. When was the last time their medication did that?" That's when the footsteps came slow and sure, and Trish Weller appeared in the doorway with her silver tray, 2 syringes filled with amber liquid, like she was bringing judgment. The second the boys saw her, it was like someone unplugged their courage. Their crying stopped, their bodies went stiff, their eyes dropped, and I got this cold wave down my spine because kids don't do that for no reason. Trish clipped a pulse monitor onto Miles's finger, stared at the numbers for 2 seconds, and announced, elevated heart rate, perspiration. Stress accelerates degeneration, and she said it in this calm, official way that made Cameron's shoulders sag with guilt. Then she looked at me, not angry, more like amused, and she said, "Household staff often become emotionally attached and mistake excitement for improvement. It's a placebo effect in the uneducated." Something in me snapped, not loud, just firm. "They're not afraid of playing," I said. "They're afraid of you." Trish smiled like I'd called her pretty, and she turned to Cameron like I wasn't even there. Cameron rubbed his temples like he was trying to squeeze the panic out of his skull, and he chose the version of reality that let him keep trusting the system. He fired me right there, tired, voice, eyes avoiding mine. "You have 5 minutes," he said. "Pack and go." Noah twisted in his chair as Trish rolled them out, and he whispered, "Don't go, Rosie." And my throat tightened so hard I could barely breathe. After they disappeared, the penthouse went back to that dead quiet, and Cameron poured himself a drink like whiskey could erase doubt. I should have walked out and never looked back, and that would have been the safe choice, but as I grabbed my bag, my eyes landed on Trish's tray, where she'd set it down in the rush, and beside the syringes was a tiny glass vial she'd used to draw the dose. It looked empty, just trash, nothing anyone would notice, and I don't know what made me do it. Maybe instinct, maybe anger, maybe that little whisper in my gut that said this woman is wrong, but I slid the vial into the finger of my neon glove and tucked the glove into my bag. At the door, rain hammering the glass behind me, I turned back and said the only thing I could think of that might crack Cameron's armor. "If your kids are that fragile, why does your nurse keep medicine in her personal bag instead of the locked cabinet?" And I added, "Check the kitchen cameras today at 2, then I walked into the storm. I didn't get far, maybe 3 blocks head down, bag clutched to my chest, trying not to cry because I wasn't crying for the job. I was crying for those boys. A sleek black Porsche Taycan slid up beside me, tires hissing on wet pavement, and the headlights hit me like a spotlight. The door opened, and Cameron jumped out, suit-ruined hair, plastered to his forehead, breathing like he'd run a mile. I raised the neon glove like it was a weapon. "I have proof," I said, voice shaking, and I expected him to yell. I expected him to threaten, but he didn't. His face looked wrecked, like a man who'd finally seen the monster under the bed. "My boys are dying," he said, and my stomach dropped. He told me Trish called him screaming that the twins were having seizures, that I poisoned them out of revenge, that she found blue powder on the floor. The setup was so obvious, it was almost insulting, but it still worked on my nerves, because when kids are involved, your brain goes straight to worst case. Then my mind grabbed onto what I'd seen, the fear in the boys' eyes, when Trish entered the heavy sleep, the way they came alive when she was gone, and I heard myself say, "It's an overdose," like the words came from somewhere older than me, a paralytic. "She's framing me because she knows you checked the footage." Cameron stared at me, rain dripping off his lashes, and I could see him choosing between 2 nightmares: trust the credentialed nurse who'd been his lifeline, or trust the cleaning lady he'd just accused of murder. Finally, he whispered, "Come back, prove it," and I got in the car, because pride is worthless when a child can't breathe. We flew back to the building, tires slicing through water, and when we pulled up, the lobby was chaos, paramedics, neighbors peeking security, trying to look useful, sirens bouncing off glass and steel. Trish was by the ambulance, performing grief like she was on stage, wringing her hands, shouting medical words loud enough for everyone to hear. And the second she saw me behind Cameron, her face sharpened and she screamed, "Murderer! Arrest her!" 2 cops moved toward me, hands near their belts, and for one sick moment I could feel the whole room leaning toward the simple story. Nurse good, poor cleaner, bad case closed. Then Cameron stepped in front of me like a wall and roared, "Back off!" And the authority in his voice shocked even me, because money has its own language and everyone understood it. He turned on Trish, eyes blazing. "I saw the footage," he said. "I know what you did." Trish tried to pivot, tried to keep control of the narrative, yelling about poison and chemicals and cleaning supplies, trying to steer the doctors toward the wrong treatment. Because if those kids died under the wrong antidote, she'd get to point at me forever. The ER doctor hesitated, sweaty and stressed, looking between Cameron and Trish like he was standing at a fork in the road, with death on both sides. Cameron said, "It's not poison. It's a surgical paralytic. They're suffocating," and the doctor's face tightened because he knew what that meant, but he needed proof. Cameron looked at me. "Show him," he said. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my bag, but I pulled the neon glove out, turned the finger inside out, and the tiny vial slid into my palm. I handed it to the doctor. He opened it, sniffed, and his eyes changed instantly. "Ventilate now," he barked. "Antidote, now move," and the whole team shifted like a machine, clicking into the right gear. Trish took a step back, and one of the cops, the same guy who'd been reaching for me, turned and stopped her instead. "Ma'am," he said, "calm, you're coming with us." And that's the moment I almost collapsed, because when the world flips like that, it messes with your balance. 1 second, you're the villain, the next, you're the witness, and all I could think was, please, please keep those boys alive. Inside the ambulance, the world shrank to harsh lights and beeping monitors, and 2 tiny bodies that wouldn't move, Miles's chest barely rising, because the drug was literally stealing his breath, Noah limp beside him, and Cameron sat there staring like if he blinked, he'd lose them. He looked across at me and his voice broke. "If they live, I'll give you anything," and I believed him, not because he was generous, but because desperation makes people honest. I swallowed hard and said, "Be their father, because money isn't what those boys needed. They needed him, present, messy human, not a wallet in a suit." Then Miles's monitor flatlined, one long tone that felt like a knife, and Cameron made this sound I'll never forget, like grief ripped out of him without permission. The paramedic shocked Miles once, then again, and the line stayed cruelly straight for a beat too long, and my whole body went cold. Then a tiny blip returned, weak and uneven. Then another, then a jittery rhythm, and the doctor exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. "He's back," he said barely, "but he's back." The boys survived the night. Recovery wasn't magic, it was slow, but the paralysis lifted, and over the next days, the twins started moving, in little bursts, like their bodies were remembering. They were allowed to live. Meanwhile, detectives did what detectives do. They followed the money, because evil usually leaves receipts. Trish had been paid through a shell account, regular transfers, that led to Cameron's brother-in-law, Grant Carlisle, the fun uncle, who always insisted Cameron should work while he handled family stuff, the guy everyone trusted, because he smiled at the right times. Cameron's late wife had set up a trust for the twins, and the fine print was ugly if the boys died or were declared permanently disabled before 18 control shifted to her family, meaning Grant got rich if Miles and Noah never got better. When Cameron learned that I watched something in him go still, like rage turned into ice, and he decided to stop being a spectator in his own life. Grant showed up pretending to care, bringing gifts, acting shocked about Trish, and Cameron played him like a chess move. He invited him in, put the bank records on the biggest TV in that penthouse, and he asked softly, "Explain this." Grant denied it. Of course, then he got irritated, then he got sloppy, and he slipped. He named the exact drug. Trish used a detail only investigators knew, and Cameron's eyes narrowed like a blade. That's when Detective Aisha Brooks stepped out with federal agents and they cuffed Grant right there on the marble floor he used to walk across like he owned it. Watching his smile collapse into panic was satisfying. I'm not going to lie, because some people coast on privilege so long, they forget consequences exist until metal clicks around their wrists. Trish went down too, charges stacked high, and suddenly that sterile, quiet penthouse had noise again. Real noise therapy equipment moved into sunlight. Cartoons on the TV, the twins laughing like they'd been freed. Cameron offered me a contract, a raise, a thank you, that looked expensive, and I took the work because I still have bills. I'm not above survival. But I never stopped thinking about the moment the cops turned toward me without a second thought, because Trish pointed and the room agreed. Here's the part that might start an argument, and I want it to because that's where the truth lives. Trish and Grant are monsters, sure, but Cameron built the perfect habitat for them by being absent, by trusting titles more than faces, by letting fear outsource his parenting. He didn't hurt his kids with his hands, but he almost lost them with his distance. And if I hadn't been just the cleaner doing something as small as making a window-washing dance, those boys might still be strapped into chairs, sedated into silence, and everyone would call it care. So tell me, who's guilty in your eyes? Just the nurse and the uncle, or the father too, for choosing the official story over what his children were literally showing him? And be real, would you have believed me before you saw the footage? Or would you have needed a rich man to validate my words for them to matter? Drop your take in the comments. Challenge each other. Tell me if you've witnessed something like this, someone judged by their job or their clothes or their accent. And if you want more stories where the invisible person turns out to be the only one paying attention, hit like, subscribe, and share this with somebody who needs the reminder that credentials don't equal character. Because the next time a room rushes to blame the easiest target, you might be the only one who can slow it down.